The dust was a living thing in Montana, a brown ghost that haunted the horizon. Fiona Matthews watched it from her porch, the rifle resting easy in the crook of her arm. At 25, she felt older than the hills. Her life had been a series of closed doors, her parents taken by fever, her husband Robert by a bandit's bullet, and her dream of a family stolen by a doctor's grim words. "You'll never bear children, Mrs. Matthews." The words echoed in the silence of her empty cabin. A year she'd been alone, holding on to this patch of dirt and sorrow. Holding on by a thread. That's when she heard it. The slow, steady beat of a horse's hooves. Visitors were a bad sign out here. She raised the rifle, the wood cool and solid against her cheek. A single rider emerged from the haze of the setting sun, a tall silhouette on a tired horse. He stopped a respectful distance away, his hands in plain sight. "Evening, ma'am," he called out. His voice was rough, like gravel. "Name's Quentin Xavier. My horse threw a shoe. Wondered if I might trouble you for some water." Fiona's eyes narrowed. He was a long way from anywhere. His face was covered in stubble, but his eyes were sharp, missing nothing. A gun hung low on his hip. He looked like trouble, but the way he sat on that limping horse, there was a gentleness there, too. "Water trough is out back," she said, her voice tight. She didn't lower the rifle. He just tipped his hat. "Much obliged." He led the horse around the cabin, his movements slow, deliberate. Fiona watched him, her heart thumping a nervous rhythm against her ribs. She'd been so careful this past year, so alone. Maybe that was the problem. Loneliness was a hunger that made you do foolish things. She followed him to the stable, watching as he lifted the horse's hoof. His hands were practiced, sure. He wasn't lying about knowing horses. "You said you were a guide," she asked, the rifle still held at the ready. He glanced up, a flash of something in his eyes. Surprise, or something else. "For the railroad surveyors," he said smoothly. "Got separated in that last dust storm." He pointed with his chin toward the east fence line. "Looks like you've had trouble. Fence is cut." Fiona's blood ran cold. She hadn't noticed. Robert had built that fence to last a lifetime. "Bandits," she said, the word tasting like ash. "A year ago, they took the horses." Quentin grunted, his focus back on the hoof. He didn't say he was sorry. He just nodded, like he understood that sorry was a useless word. "Just the horses?" he asked, his voice casual. Too casual. "And my husband," she replied, the words a fresh wound. He went still. For a long moment, the only sound was the tired breathing of the horse. Then he straightened up, the damaged horseshoe in his hand. "They took a good man and left a cut fence," he said, looking not at her, but at the dark line of the mountains. "Doesn't seem like a fair trade." There was something wrong with his sentence, something that didn't add up. Why would he mention the fence again? It was just a cut fence. Unless it wasn't. Quentin offered to chop some wood for the water. Fiona watched from the kitchen window as he swung the axe. He moved with a brutal efficiency, a power that was almost unnerving. In an hour, he'd chopped more wood than she could in a day. When he came inside for the stew she'd offered, he moved with a quiet watchfulness that filled her small cabin. They ate in silence for a while, the tension a third person at the table. "These bandits," he said finally. "Did the sheriff come out?" "Sheriff Miller. He came, said it was likely drifters, said they were long gone." Quentin took a slow bite of cornbread, his eyes fixed on her. "And you believed him?" The question caught her off guard. "Why wouldn't I?" "No reason," he said, but his gaze drifted toward the hearth, where Robert's old hunting knife hung on the wall. "Just seems a long way to ride for a few horses." He was right. It had always seemed strange. Robert had raised good stock, but not the best in the territory, not worth a man's life. Quentin was seeing the same holes in the story that had bothered her for a year, but he was seeing them in less than an hour. Later, as he prepared to sleep in the barn, he paused at the door. "That south pasture, Mrs. Matthews, the one with the cut fence. You ever notice the ground out there, near the big oak?" Fiona shook her head. "What about it?" A shadow passed over his face. "Looks disturbed, like someone was digging for something, not just burying, something else." He tipped his hat. "Sleep well." She didn't sleep at all. His words turned over and over in her mind. Digging for what? The bandits had taken what they wanted, hadn't they? At first light, she went out to the south pasture. The fence was cut clean, just as he'd said, and near the old oak tree the earth was different. Sunken, as if a heavy chest had been lifted from the ground. But that was impossible. Robert had no secrets, no treasure. When she turned back toward the house, Quentin was there, fixing the fence he'd pointed out. He hadn't left at dawn, as he'd promised. "You didn't have to do that," she said, her voice betraying her sleepless night. "A good fence is important," he replied, not looking at her. He tested a post, his hands strong and capable. "Keeps things out. Sometimes it keeps things in." His words were layered with meaning she couldn't grasp. He told her his survey party wouldn't miss him for another day. He said it was the least he could do. Over a meager breakfast, he spread out a worn map. "My party should be near Crowley Creek," he said, tracing a line with his finger. But his eyes weren't on the map. They were on her. "This is a lot of land for one person," he said, his voice soft. "Hard to keep safe." Then he made his proposition. He'd finished his work with the railroad in 2 weeks. He could come back, work for room and board and a small share. Help her get the place secure before the snows came. Every instinct screamed no. But the image of that cut fence, of that sunken earth, made her hesitate. He saw things she didn't. He understood things she couldn't. Maybe he wasn't just a guide. Maybe he was the answer to a question she'd been too afraid to ask. "One season," she agreed. "Through the harvest." "Deal," he said, and when he shook her hand, his grip was like iron. As he rode away, a terrifying thought struck her. He hadn't come here by accident. He wasn't lost. He had come here looking for something, and she was standing right in the middle of it. 2 weeks, 14 days. Fiona counted each one like a prisoner marking time on a cell wall. She worked from sunup to sundown, trying to push away the unease that had settled deep in her bones. The ranch was quiet, too quiet. Every snap of a twig, every hoot of an owl, sent a jolt of fear through her. She was waiting. But for what? For Quentin's return, or for the return of the men who had cut her fence? On the 14th day, just as the sun began to dip below the mountains, he appeared. He wasn't alone. He led a pack horse laden with supplies, sacks of flour, tins of coffee, new tools, and something long and heavy wrapped in oilcloth. "Railroad paid well," was all he said, but his eyes told a different story. This wasn't the pay of a simple trail guide. This was the preparation for a siege. The days that followed were a blur of hard labor. Quentin worked like a man possessed. He didn't just mend fences, he reinforced them with stone foundations. He didn't just patch the barn roof, he rebuilt it with thick new timbers. He was turning her vulnerable homestead into a fortress, and he was always watching. His eyes constantly scanned the horizon, his hand never far from the pistol on his hip. He taught her to shoot, not just for hunting, but for defense. How to reload quickly, how to aim for center mass, how to fight. "Who are you expecting, Quentin?" she finally asked one evening. her hands aching from cleaning the rifle he insisted she keep by her side. He looked at her, his face grim in the lamplight. "The men who killed your husband weren't drifters, Fiona. Drifters don't come back." The blood drained from her face. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying they didn't get what they came for." He walked over to the hearth, to the loose stone he'd pointed out his first night there. With a grunt, he pried it free. Behind it was a small, dark cavity. Empty. Robert was a clever man. He must have hidden it somewhere else. "Hidden what?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "We had nothing of value. Just the land, the horses." "Everyone has something of value," Quentin said, his voice low and dangerous. He replaced the stone, his movements precise. "And the men who are coming for it won't stop until they find it." He never said what it was. He just let the fear hang in the air between them, a poison gas. He began to ask questions about Robert. Seemingly innocent questions about his habits, his friends, his trips to town. But Fiona could feel the purpose behind them. He was hunting, searching for a trail left by a dead man. One night he asked about the family Bible. "It's in the chest at the foot of my bed," she told him. He brought it to the table, his rough fingers turning the delicate pages with surprising care. He wasn't reading the scripture. He was studying the margins, the spaces between the lines. Then he stopped. In the section recording family births and deaths, next to Robert's name, was a series of small, faint numbers written in pencil. 42 to 17-3. "What does it mean?" Fiona asked. Quentin stared at the numbers, a muscle twitching in his jaw. "It's a code, or coordinates." He looked up at her, and for the first time, she saw the full weight of the truth in his eyes. The trail guide, the drifter, it was all a lie. "Who are you, Quentin?" He took a deep breath. "My name is Quentin Xavier, and I was your husband's partner." The floor seemed to drop out from under her. "Partner? Robert was a homesteader, a farmer. He didn't have partners." "That's not possible," she stammered. "Robert worked for the Pinkerton Detective Agency," Quentin said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "So do I. We were investigating a man named Silas Kane. He's been robbing gold shipments from the territorial mines for the past 2 years. Your husband got close. Too close. He found evidence that could put Kane away for good, a ledger detailing every robbery." Fiona sank into a chair, her head spinning. The man she had married, the quiet farmer who dreamed of a peaceful life, was an undercover agent. Her entire life with him had been a carefully constructed lie. "The bandits," she whispered. "Were Kane's men," Quentin finished. "They didn't come for horses. They came for the ledger. Robert must have known they were coming. He hid it, and they killed him when he wouldn't talk." The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. The strange attack, the sheriff's disinterest, the disturbed earth by the oak tree, a decoy. Robert had been playing a deadly game, and he had lost. "And you?" she asked, looking at this stranger who knew more about her husband than she did. "Why are you here now?" "Because Kane doesn't know Robert is dead," he said, and the coldness of his words chilled her to the bone. "The official report said he died in a hunting accident. Kane thinks he just disappeared, but he knows the ledger is here, and sooner or later he's going to come back to tear this place apart to find it." He looked at the numbers in the Bible. 42:17-3. It's not coordinates. It's a page number, a line number, and a word number. He flipped frantically through the Bible, his fingers tracing the lines. He stopped on a page in the book of Job. Page 42, line 17, third word. The word was stone. Quentin's eyes darted around the room, landing on the massive fieldstone that made up the fireplace. "He built this fireplace himself, didn't he?" Fiona nodded, numb. Quentin grabbed a poker and began tapping each stone, listening to the sound. Most rang with a dull thud, but one, near the bottom, echoed with a hollow note. Working together, they pried it loose. Behind it, wrapped in oilcloth, was a small, leather-bound ledger. They had found it. The thing Robert had died for. The thing that would bring a killer to their door. As Quentin opened the ledger, a small folded piece of paper fell out. It wasn't a part of the ledger. It was a letter, and it was addressed to her. Her hands shook as she opened it. It was Robert's handwriting. "My dearest Fiona," it began. "If you are reading this, then the worst has happened. I never wanted this life to touch you. I pray Quentin found you. He is the only man I trust. There is another ledger, a copy. The numbers in the family Bible point to the first. The location of the second is known only to Dr. Albright in Helena. Dr. Albright. The same doctor who had told her she was barren. The trap wasn't just closing in. It had been set for her from the very beginning. The doctor. It all came back to the doctor. A kindly, gray-haired man who had patted her hand and delivered a death sentence to her dreams. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Matthews," he'd said, his eyes full of false sympathy. He hadn't just been a doctor. He had been an agent of Silas Kane. He had lied to her, not out of a medical mistake, but with cold, calculated cruelty. "Why?" Fiona whispered, the letter trembling in her hand. "Why would he do that?" "To break you," Quentin said, his voice a low growl. "Kane wanted this land, not for what was on it, but for what was under it. The ledger was the key, but the land was the prize. Albright's job was to crush your spirit, make you believe you had no future here. A grieving widow, unable to have children, alone on a failing homestead. He figured you'd sell for pennies, and Kane's man would be waiting to buy it. It was a special kind of evil, to not just kill a woman's husband, but to poison her future, to make her believe she was broken from the inside out. All for a patch of dirt. The rage that filled Fiona was a pure, white-hot fire. They had taken everything. Now she understood. They hadn't left her with nothing. They had left her with a weapon, this land, this cabin, this truth. "He has the copy of the ledger," Fiona said, her voice steady now, hard as iron. "And he's the one link that connects the town to Kane's operation," Quentin added. "Sheriff Miller, too. He has to be on the payroll. That's why he dismissed the attack as drifters. The whole town was a spider web, and she was the fly caught in the center. But now she had a spider of her own. Quentin. He was pacing the small cabin, no longer a simple ranch hand, but a predator mapping out his territory. "Kane will know we found the ledger," he said. "He'll have a man watching this place, watching the smoke from the chimney. He'll know someone else is here. He'll move soon." The world shrank to the four walls of the cabin. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every gust of wind sounded like approaching hoofbeats. The fortress Quentin had built was about to be tested. Days passed. The waiting was a torture. They took turns sleeping, one always on watch, rifle in hand. They spoke in low voices, poring over Robert's ledger, a catalog of Kane's greed and violence. Fiona learned more about her husband in those few days than she had in 3 years of marriage. She saw his courage, his cleverness, and she saw the weight of the secrets he had carried. The attack came not at night, as they expected, but in the gray light of a stormy afternoon. The rain came down in sheets, turning the world outside into a blurry watercolor of brown and gray. There were 6 of them, dark shapes on horseback, materializing out of the downpour. They didn't ride in shooting. They were professionals. They surrounded the cabin, taking cover, their rifles glinting in the dim light. A voice called out, slick and confident. "Fiona Matthews, we know you're in there, and we know you're not alone. We have a message from Silas Kane. He wants what belongs to him. Send out the ledger, and we'll let you live." Quentin moved to the window, peering through a crack in the shutters. "He's lying," he murmured. "They can't leave witnesses." Fiona's heart hammered against her ribs, but her hands were steady on her rifle. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but the rage was stronger. "Then we don't give it to them," she said. The first shot shattered the kitchen window, spraying glass across the floor. The siege had begun. The next few hours were a nightmare of splintering wood and the deafening roar of gunfire. They moved through the cabin like ghosts, using the furniture for cover, firing back sparingly, making every shot count. Quentin was a machine, calm and focused, calling out positions, directing her fire. Fiona found a rhythm in the chaos. Load, aim, fire. The motions Robert had taught her for hunting took on a new, deadly purpose. She was no longer just defending her home. She was claiming justice for her husband. One of Cain's men got careless, trying to move from the cover of the well to the stable. Quentin's rifle barked once. The man fell and didn't get up. There were 5 left. As darkness fell, the rain lessened to a drizzle, but the attack intensified. They tried to set fire to the barn. Quentin, anticipating the move, had placed buckets of water at the ready. He darted out under the cover of darkness, dousing the flames before they could take hold, the rifle shots of Cain's men kicking up mud around his feet. He scrambled back inside, his breathing ragged. "They're getting desperate," he panted. "That's when they make mistakes." He was right. 2 more men tried to rush the front porch, hoping to break down the door. Fiona, positioned at the side window, fired. One man cried out and clutched his leg. His partner dragged him back into the darkness. 4 left, one of them wounded. The stalemate held until just before dawn. The silence outside was unnerving. "They're planning something," Quentin whispered, his eyes scanning the gloom. Suddenly, a new sound cut through the air. Not gunfire, but the terrified cry of a child. Fiona's blood froze. The sound came from the direction of the old Wilkins homestead, a mile down the creek. Mrs. Wilkins, the elderly woman who lived there, was all alone. Except Fiona had heard a rumor in town just a week ago. A young couple on a neighboring property had died of fever, leaving behind 2 little girls. Mrs. Wilkins had taken them in temporarily. The cry came again, followed by a man's harsh shout. "It's a diversion," Quentin hissed. "They want to draw us out." But Fiona was already moving toward the back door. "Those are children, Quentin." "Fiona, it's a trap." "I don't care," she said, her eyes blazing with a fire he hadn't seen before. "They took my husband. They tried to take my future. They will not touch those children." It was a reckless, suicidal plan, to leave the safety of the cabin and ride into an ambush. But looking at her face, Quentin knew there was no arguing. He also knew she was right. Some lines had to be drawn. "All right," he said, grabbing a second pistol. "But we do this my way." They slipped out the back, using the storm cellar as cover, and crawled on their bellies to the tree line. The 2 remaining men from Cain's gang were exactly where Quentin expected them to be, hidden behind a rock outcropping, their rifles aimed at the front of the cabin, waiting for the door to open. They hadn't counted on their targets coming out the back. Quentin and Fiona opened fire at the same time. The surprise was total. The gunfight was short and brutal. When the echoes faded, the 2 men lay still in the mud. But the danger wasn't over. The man who had taken the children was still out there. They ran toward the Wilkins place, their lungs burning. The first light of dawn painting the sky a sickly gray. They found him by the creek. He had the 2 little girls, twins with blonde curls and terrified blue eyes, huddled together. He held a knife to the throat of one of them. "Drop the guns," he snarled, his eyes wide with panic, "or she dies." Fiona and Quentin froze. The man was one of the two who had rushed the porch earlier. His leg was wrapped in a bloody rag. He was wounded, desperate, and that made him 10 times more dangerous. "Let the children go," Quentin said, his voice calm, trying to de-escalate. "You can take my horse. We'll let you ride away." "I'm not a fool," the man spat. "Give me the ledger." Fiona's mind raced. They were at a standoff. Any sudden move and a child would die. Then she saw it. One of the little girls, the one not held by the man, was staring at her. The child's lips moved, forming a silent word. "Mama." And in that instant, Fiona knew what she had to do. She took a slow step forward, lowering her rifle. "Fiona, no!" Quentin warned. "The ledger is buried," she said, her voice clear and strong, projecting a confidence she didn't feel. "Under the hearthstone, the big one on the left. You can have it. Just let them go." The man hesitated, his eyes darting from her to Quentin. He wanted to believe her. He wanted a way out. "How do I know you're not lying?" he demanded. "You don't," Fiona said. "But Robert Xavier was my husband, and I know every secret of that house." She used Quentin's last name for Robert, a deliberate slip, a signal. The man's greed warred with his fear. The ledger was his only way back into Kane's good graces. He shoved the little girl forward, making his decision. "Go get it, and if you're not back in 5 minutes..." Fiona didn't wait for the threat. She turned and ran back toward the cabin, her heart pounding a frantic prayer. She had no idea if her plan would work. She was counting on one thing, that this wounded, cornered man was a bully, not a monster, and that Quentin understood the signal she had sent. She didn't go for the ledger. She ran straight to the porch, grabbed the heaviest cast-iron skillet she owned, and ran back. She burst from the trees just as Quentin made his move. The instant the man's attention had shifted to watch Fiona run, Quentin had dived for cover, coming up firing. His shot went wide, intentionally, kicking up dirt near the man's feet. It was just the distraction Fiona needed. The man whirled, raising his pistol, but he was too slow. Fiona brought the heavy skillet down on his head with all the force of her fear and rage. He crumpled to the ground, unconscious. Silence descended, broken only by the whimpering of the two little girls. Fiona dropped the skillet and ran to them, gathering them into her arms. They clung to her, burying their faces in her dress, their small bodies shaking. Over their heads, her eyes met Quentin's. They had survived. They had won. But they both knew this wasn't the end. They had taken out Kane's pawns. Now the king himself would be coming. They brought the twins, Eliza and Emma, back to the cabin. The girls were in shock, their eyes wide and haunted. Fiona cleaned them up, gave them warm milk, and wrapped them in her thickest quilt. She sat with them by the fire, humming a nameless tune, her heart aching for their loss. In their terrified faces, she saw her own reflection, a life shattered by violence. Quentin tied up their captive and threw him in the storm cellar. Then he found old Mrs. Wilkins. She was alive, but badly shaken, locked in her pantry. She told them the girls' parents, the Millers, hadn't died of fever. They had been murdered a week ago. Mr. Miller had apparently stumbled onto something he shouldn't have seen in the hills. Something to do with Silas Kane. The story of a fever was a lie, spread by Sheriff Miller to cover Kane's tracks. Another piece of the puzzle fell into place. "Kane is cleaning house," Quentin said, his face a mask of cold fury. "He's eliminating anyone who might know something, and now he knows his men have failed. He'll come himself." Fiona looked at the two girls asleep by the fire. They were orphans, their lives upended by the same man who had destroyed hers. A fierce, protective instinct rose in her, stronger than any fear. "Then we don't wait for him," she said. We go to Helena, we go to Dr. Albright, and we get the second ledger. It was an insane gamble, a 2-day ride through open country, with Kane and his entire gang likely hunting them. They would be exposed, vulnerable. But staying at the cabin was a death sentence. Kane would come with overwhelming force. Their only chance was to seize the initiative, to get the evidence that could bring in the U.S. Marshals. They left before noon, taking 3 horses. Fiona rode with one of the twins in front of her, the other with Quentin. The ledger was wrapped in oilcloth and strapped to Quentin's saddle. They moved fast, pushing the horses, their eyes constantly scanning the ridgelines. The first day was tense but uneventful. They made a cold camp that night, not daring to light a fire. Fiona stayed awake with the girls while Quentin stood watch. Eliza, the quieter of the two, woke from a nightmare, crying for her mama. Fiona held her, whispering words of comfort, feeling the child's small heart beat against her own. In that moment, something shifted inside her. The empty space, the barren wound left by the doctor's lie, began to fill with a new kind of love. It didn't matter what a doctor had said. She was a mother now. They reached the outskirts of Helena late the next afternoon. The town was bigger, busier than their small community. Quentin found a livery stable where they could leave the horses and the girls with the stable owner's wife, a kind-faced woman who asked no questions. "Stay here until I come for you," Fiona told the girls, kissing each of their foreheads. "We'll be back soon, I promise." Leaving them was the hardest thing she'd ever done. Dr. Albright's office was on the main street, a respectable-looking building with a polished brass sign. They went in through the back. Quentin picked the lock with a deftness that spoke of long practice. The office was quiet, smelling of antiseptic and old paper. They found the doctor in his study. He was packing a bag in a hurry, his face pale and sweaty. He looked up as they entered, and a flicker of recognition, then pure terror, crossed his face. "Matthews," he breathed. "It's Xavier now," Fiona said, the rifle leveled at his chest. "And you have something that belongs to my husband." Albright started to bluster, to deny, but Quentin slammed Robert's ledger down on the desk. "The game is up, Doctor. We have the proof. We just need your copy. Give it to us, and we'll hand you over to the marshals. Don't, and we leave you for Kane. I imagine he'll be less gentle." The doctor's face crumpled. He was a weak man, a coward who hid behind his position and his lies. He fumbled with a key, opened a secret compartment in his desk, and pulled out a second, identical ledger. "Take it," he whimpered. "Just don't let him find me." But it was too late. A floorboard creaked in the hallway. Quentin spun around, pushing Fiona behind him, just as the door to the study burst open. It wasn't one of Kane's thugs. It was Sheriff Miller. And standing behind him, with a cold smile on his face and a Colt peacemaker in his hand, was a tall, elegantly dressed man with dead eyes. Silas Kane. "Thank you, Doctor," Kane said, his voice smooth as silk and cold as a grave, "for gathering all my property in one place. And Sheriff, it seems we have some vermin to exterminate." The room was a trap, and they had walked right into it. Sheriff Miller leveled his own gun at Quentin. Dr. Albright was sobbing in the corner. There was no way out. "It's over, Xavier," Kane said, stepping into the room. "I should have known Robert had a partner. He was always too good to be a simple farmer. Give me the ledgers." Quentin didn't move. His eyes were locked on Kane, two predators sizing each other up. "You'll have to kill me first." "That was always the plan," Kane said with a shrug. Fiona's mind was a whirlwind. This was it. This was how it ended. Killed in a dusty office, her body left beside the man she loved, while 2 little girls waited for a promise she couldn't keep. The rage came back, burning away the fear. She would not die like this. She looked at the desk. at the heavy glass inkwell, at the letter opener, at the medical bag filled with instruments. She wasn't a gunslinger like Quentin, but she was a survivor. As Kane took another step forward, gesturing for the ledgers, Fiona did the last thing anyone expected. She screamed, a raw, piercing sound of pure fury. And then she lunged, not at Kane, but at the large oil lamp on the edge of the desk. She swiped it with all her strength, sending it crashing to the floor. Oil and flames exploded across the wooden floorboards, instantly creating a wall of fire between them and the door. Chaos erupted. Sheriff Miller, his clothes catching fire, screamed and batted at the flames. Dr. Albright shrieked and scrambled for the window. Kane cursed, backing away from the inferno. In that split second of confusion, Quentin acted. He fired twice. The first shot took Sheriff Miller in the chest. The second hit Kane in the shoulder, spinning him around. Kane roared in pain and fury, firing his own pistol wildly into the smoke-filled room before staggering out into the hallway. "The back window!" Quentin yelled, grabbing Fiona's arm and the ledgers. He shoved the panicked doctor aside and kicked open the window. They scrambled out into the back alley just as the flames consumed the office, the sound of Kane shouting orders to his men echoing from the street. They ran, ducking through alleys and side streets, the smell of smoke clinging to them. They had the evidence. They had escaped. But they were in the middle of a town controlled by a wounded, enraged killer. And they still had to get back to the girls. They made it to the livery stable, their hearts pounding. The stable owner's wife took one look at their smoke-stained faces and hurried the girls out from the back room. Eliza and Emma ran to Fiona, clinging to her legs. "Saddle the fastest horses you have," Quentin told the owner, pressing a handful of bills into his hand. "We're not the only ones leaving town tonight." They rode out of Helena under the cover of darkness, not back the way they came, but north, toward the capital, toward the U.S. Marshals. Behind them, a section of the town glowed red against the night sky. They had started a fire, and now all of Kane's rats were scrambling out of the woodwork. The hunt was on. The ride to the capital was a desperate, 2-day race against time. They barely slept, pushing themselves and the horses to the breaking point. Quentin knew Kane would have men covering every road south. Their only hope was that he wouldn't expect them to ride straight into the lion's den. They arrived exhausted, covered in dust and grime, the two little girls asleep in their arms. The U.S. Marshal's office was a beacon of law and order in the chaotic territory. Quentin slammed the two ledgers down on the desk of a startled deputy. "Silas Kane," he said, his voice raw. "We have everything you need to burn his whole operation to the ground." The next few weeks were a blur. Federal marshals descended on Helena, armed with the evidence from the ledgers. They arrested dozens of men, from low-level thugs to prominent town officials. Dr. Albright, found hiding in a cellar, gave a full confession in exchange for protection. Silas Kane, wounded and cornered, was finally captured after a bloody shootout at his ranch. The reign of terror was over. Fiona and Quentin found themselves the reluctant heroes of the territory. The reward money for Kane's capture was substantial, enough to ensure they would never have to worry about a failing crop again. With the danger past, they turned their attention to the girls. Legally, they were wards of the state. But Fiona and Quentin couldn't bear the thought of sending them to an orphanage. They had become a family in the crucible of violence and fear. They went before the circuit judge, a stern man with a surprising capacity for compassion. Fiona spoke, her voice clear and steady. She told him about her husband Robert. She told him about her own shattered dream of a family. She told him how these two girls had filled a hole in her heart she thought would never heal. "They are my daughters," she finished, her hand resting on Eliza's shoulder. "In every way that matters. The judge looked at Quentin. "And you, sir, you are prepared to take on this responsibility?" Quentin looked at Fiona, then at the girls. "Your Honor," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he rarely showed. "I've spent most of my life wandering. I never had a home, not since I was a boy. These three, they are my home. I'll spend the rest of my days making sure they are safe and loved." The adoption was granted. The paperwork made official what their hearts already knew. They were the Xavier family. They returned to the homestead. The cabin, scarred by bullets and fire, felt different now. It was no longer a place of sorrow and fear, but a symbol of their survival. They began to rebuild, not just the house, but their lives. With the reward money, they bought new livestock, expanded the barn, and drew up plans for a larger house to be built beside the original cabin. Life fell into a new rhythm, one of peace and healing. The girls' nightmares slowly faded, replaced by the laughter of children helping with chores and begging for pony rides. Quentin, the stoic agent, transformed into a patient, loving father. Fiona, who had believed herself broken, discovered a boundless capacity for love. One evening, months later, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Quentin took her hand. "Fiona Matthews," he said, his voice soft. "I came to your home looking for justice for my partner. But I found something I wasn't looking for. I found a life. I found you." He pulled a simple gold band from his pocket. "Marry me, Fiona. Be my wife. Let's make this family real." Tears streamed down Fiona's face as she whispered, "Yes." They were married by the same circuit judge a month later, with Eliza and Emma as their flower girls. Their small, broken pieces had come together to form something new, something whole and strong. But fate had one last twist in store for them. A few months after the wedding, Fiona started feeling unwell. A deep fatigue settled in her bones, and a wave of nausea greeted her each morning. She dismissed it as the lingering effects of the stress they had endured. But when the symptoms persisted, a wild, impossible hope began to flicker in her heart. Quentin insisted she see the new doctor in town, a young woman named Reynolds. Fiona went, convinced it was nothing, half afraid to even voice the question that was forming in her mind. Dr. Reynolds examined her thoroughly. When she was finished, she smiled. "Well, Mrs. Xavier," she said, "it seems your family is about to get a little bigger. You're about 3 months pregnant." Fiona stared at her, stunned into silence. The words didn't make sense. "But that's not possible. Another doctor. He told me I could never—" "Doctors don't know everything," Dr. Reynolds said gently. "And sometimes a diagnosis is just plain wrong. Or, Fiona thought, sometimes a diagnosis is a lie, a cruel, calculated weapon. Dr. Albright hadn't just tried to steal her land, he had tried to steal her very identity as a woman. And he had failed. Life, stubborn and beautiful, had found a way. When she told Quentin, he simply held her, his own eyes filled with a quiet sense of wonder. That night, he held her in his arms, his hand resting on her still flat stomach. "I meant what I said, you know," he whispered. "If it had just been us, and the girls, love alone would have been enough." Fiona smiled, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "I know," she said, "but I'm so grateful for more." The following spring, as the valley bloomed with new life, Fiona gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Robert, in honor of the man whose courage had inadvertently brought them all together. Standing on the porch of their new, larger home, Fiona held her son, with her husband's arm around her and her daughters playing in the yard. She looked out over the land that had seen so much sorrow, and now held so much joy. The dust still whirled on the horizon, but it was no longer a ghost of the past. It was just the rich Montana soil, waiting for them to build their future. The journey had been harder and stranger than she ever could have imagined. But standing there, surrounded by her unexpected, miraculous family, she knew she wouldn't change a single step. Sometimes the greatest blessings are born from the deepest heartbreak, and sometimes the life you thought was over is the one that's just beginning. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe for more tales of justice and unexpected twists.